When I arrived at the wake for Michael, my husband of 35 years, 2 security guards blocked my entrance with specific orders from my own son. "She can't come in. It's a family order." The entire funeral home watched as I was forcibly removed while I screamed his name in desperation. That night, I made a 1-hour phone call that would change David's life forever. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel. Activate the notification bell because we have new stories every day. Leave a like and tell us in the comments which city you're watching from. My name is Catherine Morales Vega. I'm 67 years old, and I never imagined that the most painful day of my life would also become the moment I discovered the true nature of my only son. On the 23rd of September 2023, Michael Campos Ruiz, the man who had been my partner since 1988, lost his battle against the cancer that consumed him for 8 terrible months. During those 8 months of agony, I was the one who stood by his side every second. I slept in hospital chairs, fed his parched lips with teaspoons of water, and held his hand as the doctors gave us increasingly discouraging news. David, our 3 8-year-old son, showed up just 3 times in all that time. He always arrived with Linda Johnson, his wife, a woman who from the very first day looked at me as if I were an obstacle in her plans for social climbing. David's excuses were always the same. "Mom, I have a lot of responsibilities at the company. I can't see Dad like this. Linda is very sensitive about these things." But I understood the truth was something else. My son had built a life of luxury and comfort thanks to the CEO position I gave him in my 3 construction companies, earning $12,000 a month without ever truly breaking a sweat a single day in his life. The day Michael died, in the early morning of September 22nd, David was not there. I held his cold hand as his breathing slowly faded, whispering in his ear all the beautiful things we had lived together. When I called my son to give him the news, his first question wasn't about how his father's end had been, but about the funeral arrangements and who would cover the costs. That response sent a chill down my spine, but I decided to keep my composure. The next day, while I was handling all the legal paperwork and preparations for the wake, David disappeared again. Linda informed me by phone, with a coldness that surprised me even coming from her, that they would coordinate the details of the ceremony because it was important that everything be perfect. I didn't suspect anything strange until I arrived at the Street Michael Funeral Home in downtown Chicago at 3 p.m. on September 23rd. I had chosen that funeral home because Michael and I had attended several wakes for dear friends there, and he always commented that he found it a dignified and welcoming place. I carried a bouquet of white lilies, his favorite flowers, and in my chest, the deepest pain I had ever felt in my life. But when I approached the main entrance, 2 burly men dressed in black suits intercepted me. "Excuse me, ma'am, could you identify yourself?" one of them asked in a professional but firm voice. "I'm Catherine Morales, Michael Campos's wife." "I'm here for my husband's wake," I answered, puzzled by the presence of security in such a place. The 2 men exchanged a look that I couldn't interpret at that moment, but which I now understand perfectly. "Mrs. Morales, we have specific instructions from Mr. David Morales. He hired us for this event, and he gave us express orders that you are not to enter. It's a family decision," the taller of the 2 guards explained. The world stopped around me. The words bounced around in my head like echoes in an empty cave. "What do you mean I can't enter? It's my husband's wake. We were married for 35 years, I shouted with a desperation I had never felt before. "We are very sorry, ma'am, but our orders are clear," the other guard replied, physically blocking my path to the door. People entering and leaving the funeral home began to stop and watch the scene. I recognized some neighbors, friends of decades, co-workers, all watching as the widow was prevented from saying goodbye to her own husband. The humiliation was so intense that I felt my legs tremble and my breath catch in my throat. "Michael! Michael!" I began to shout his name towards the inside of the building, hoping that somehow my voice would reach where his body lay. The guards took me by the arms with professional but relentless firmness. "Ma'am, please, don't make this more difficult," they said as they led me away from the entrance. It was then that I saw David appear in the doorway. My son, my own blood, the boy I had raised, educated, and supported his entire life, watched me from a distance with an expression I will never forget, cold, calculated, without a hint of remorse. At his side was Linda, with a barely perceptible smile that confirmed this humiliation had been meticulously planned. "David, please let me in. I just want to say goodbye to your father," I begged with what little dignity I had left. but he simply nodded to the guards, signaling them to hold their position. Without saying a single word, he disappeared back inside the funeral home, leaving me exposed to the stares of everyone present. The guards escorted me to the sidewalk, where I remained for the next 4 hours, watching as friends, family, and acquaintances went in to pay their respects to Michael while I, his wife, was excluded like a stranger. Some approached me with obvious discomfort, not understanding what was happening, but I was too shaken to give any coherent explanations. When the wake finally ended, and I saw the casket leave for the cemetery, I knew I had witnessed not only the death of my husband, but also the birth of an iron determination within me. That night, while David was probably celebrating the execution of his humiliating plan, I picked up the phone and dialed a number that would change our lives forever. The conversation lasted exactly 1 hour and 3 minutes. By the time I hung up, David Morales Campos no longer had a future. As I returned home that night of September 23rd, my mind began to piece together the last few years with a painful clarity I had previously chosen to ignore. The humiliation at the funeral home had not been an impulsive outburst from David. It had been the culmination of a contempt that had been brewing for decades, fueled by Linda's boundless ambition and my own son's corrupting comfort. I remembered with chilling precision the exact moment when everything began to change. It was in December 2016, when David turned 31. That day, I announced that I would appoint him CEO of Morales Construction, the main company of our family group that I had founded in 1985 when he was just a year old. I also informed him that he would be the direct beneficiary of my shares in North Chicago Realty and Midwest Urban Projects, the other 2 companies I had built brick by brick, contract by contract. Michael wept with emotion that night. "Catherine, our son will have everything secured for the rest of his life," he told me while preparing the celebration dinner. I believed I was doing the right thing, securing my family's future, honoring the tradition of mothers leaving a solid legacy for their children. How naive I was not to recognize the warning signs that were already there. The first clear manifestation of the change was David's attitude toward work. During his first months as CEO, he would arrive at the office after 11 a.m. He delegated absolutely all his responsibilities to the area managers I had trained for years, and he regularly disappeared for business meetings that consisted of long lunches in expensive restaurants with Linda. Robert Miller, our trusted accountant for 15 years, began to show me worrying reports on corporate expenses. David had exponentially increased the company's entertainment expenses, justifying $300 meals as investments in business relationships. His monthly salary of $12,000, which was already generous considering his real inexperience, was supplemented by quarterly bonuses he had authorized for himself without consulting me. But what really troubled me was the transformation of his personality. The shy and respectful young man he had been until he was 30 gradually turned into someone arrogant, demanding, and deeply disrespectful towards Michael and me. The Sunday family dinners, which had been sacred in our family for decades, became sporadic and tense. David would arrive late, answer our questions about his life with monosyllables, and spend most of the time checking his phone. Linda, for her part, had begun to make increasingly direct comments about our modest lifestyle compared to the economic potential of the companies. "I don't understand why you still live in this small apartment when you could buy a mansion in Winnetka," she would say with a smile that failed to hide her contempt. David deserves to live according to his social position, not like just another employee. Michael always defended our son with a blind loyalty that I now understand was part of the problem. "Catherine, let him adjust to his new responsibility," he would tell me when I expressed my concerns. "It's normal for a successful young man to want to enjoy the fruits of his labor." But David didn't work. He simply collected a princely salary for occupying an office and signing documents that others prepared. The situation deteriorated dramatically when Michael began to get sick in early 2023. The first symptoms appeared in January: constant fatigue, persistent abdominal pain, loss of appetite. Initially, we thought it was stress or some minor digestive issue, but when the March tests revealed the presence of cancer cells in his pancreas, our world was shaken. The oncologist, Dr. Fernando Ruiz Navarro, was brutally honest during the first consultation. "Mr. Campos, your cancer is in an advanced stage. With aggressive treatment, we can hope to control the disease for a few months, maybe a year if we're lucky. Without treatment, you have between 3 and 6 months to live." Michael squeezed my hand with surprising strength and looked at me with those green eyes I had loved for almost 4 decades. "We will fight, Catherine. Together, as always." From that moment on, my life was completely reorganized around Michael's care. I delegated the daily supervision of the companies to my trusted managers, canceled all non-essential projects, and became my husband's full-time caregiver. I learned to administer morphine, to prepare soft meals his weakened stomach could tolerate, to interpret every pained expression on his face to anticipate his needs. David received the news of his father's diagnosis with a reaction that is still incomprehensible to me. Instead of asking about the treatment, the prognosis, or how he could help, his first concern was how Michael's illness would affect the operational stability of the companies. "Mom, we need to keep personal and professional matters separate," he told me with a coldness that left me frozen. During the next 8 months, while I practically lived in hospitals and clinics, David continued his routine of luxury and comfort as if nothing had changed. The 3 visits he made to his sick father were formal, brief, and always accompanied by Linda, who behaved as if being in the presence of a person with cancer was a personal inconvenience. The second visit was particularly revealing. Michael had already lost 30 pounds, his hair was completely gone due to chemotherapy, and he could barely stay awake for more than 2 hours at a time. David arrived at the hospital dressed in a $2,000 suit, wearing a Rolex on his wrist that I didn't recognize and that probably cost more than a nurse's annual salary. "Dad, you look better," he lied shamelessly while keeping a safe distance from the bed. Michael smiled weakly and extended his trembling hand towards him, but David pretended not to notice, busy checking messages on his phone. "Mom, I need to talk to you about some urgent contracts," he told me after just 10 minutes, as if the hospital room were a boardroom. Linda, meanwhile, had stayed in the hallway, claiming that the hospital smells made her dizzy. When I went to find her so she could at least say hello to Michael, I found her on the phone talking about plans for a weekend in Miami. "Yes, honey, I already booked the 5-star hotel. David needs to relax after so much work stress," she said without the slightest trace of shame. The third and final visit occurred 2 weeks before Michael died, when it was already clear that the end was approaching rapidly. The doctors had suspended active treatment and had begun palliative care. Michael slept most of the day, waking occasionally to whisper my name or ask for water. David arrived that afternoon with a strangely urgent attitude. Instead of approaching his father's bed, he asked me to step out into the hallway for a private and important conversation. "Mom, I think it's time we talked about the future," he began with a seriousness I hadn't seen in him for years. "Dad is not going to recover, and we need to prepare for what comes next." What followed was the most heartbreaking conversation I had ever had in my life. David explained to me with a meticulousness that showed prior preparation that he had been analyzing the family's asset structure with specialized lawyers. He had identified tax optimization opportunities that required immediate corporate restructuring to maximize the inheritance and minimize tax burdens. In simple terms, my son had been preparing the distribution of our assets while his father was dying in a hospital bed a few feet away. He had calculated the value of the 3 companies, our savings, the properties, even Michael's life insurance, and had developed a detailed plan to modernize the family's administration under his exclusive leadership. That night, when I returned home after spending the entire day at the hospital, I sat in the living room that Michael had decorated with so much love and finally understood the magnitude of my mistake. By giving David a position of power without him having proven he deserved it, I had created a monster of ambition and selfishness. By shielding him from the consequences of his actions for decades, I had allowed him to develop a sense of entitlement that had completely dehumanized him. But that night of September 23rd, after the deepest humiliation of my life, I decided it was time to correct 38 years of maternal errors. The phone call I would make would change everything forever. It was 11:47 p.m. when I dialed Michael Ortega's number. My trusted lawyer for the past 22 years answered on the 3rd ring, despite the late hour. "Catherine, I'm so sorry about Michael. I received your message this morning, but I didn't want to bother you at such a painful time," he said in that deep voice that had always given me confidence in the most complicated moments. "Michael, I need this conversation to remain between us, and I need you to act with absolute urgency," I replied with a determination that surprised even myself. "What I'm about to ask of you will completely change the family situation, and once we take the first step, there will be no turning back." "I'm listening carefully, Catherine." "You know you can count on my absolute discretion," he confirmed as I took a deep breath to organize my thoughts. What I was about to do required surgical precision in every legal detail, perfect timing in execution, and above all, the emotional coldness I never thought I possessed until that night. "I want you to immediately review all of David's employment contracts in the 3 companies," I began, explaining as I walked through my empty apartment. "Specifically, I need you to locate the professional conduct clause we included in his CEO contract when we appointed him in December 2016. That clause states that behavior that damages the corporate or family reputation constitutes just cause for immediate termination of the employment relationship." Michael knew that clause perfectly because he had been the one to draft it following my specific instructions. "Catherine, that clause is absolutely valid and enforceable," he confirmed after several minutes of reviewing the documents digitally. "What specific situation would constitute the contractual breach?" I narrated in detail the events of the wake, describing how David had hired private security to prevent me from participating in my own husband's funeral service, exposing our family to a public humiliation witnessed by dozens of people professionally connected to our companies. "This situation definitely constitutes a serious violation of the professional conduct clause," Michael ruled with the authority of his 30 years of experience in corporate law. "We will proceed immediately with the termination of the employment contract for just cause, which means David will lose all associated benefits: salary, bonuses, company car, private health insurance, company apartment, and any right to severance pay." But my plan was much broader than a simple dismissal. "Michael, I want you to immediately contact Robert Miller and request a complete report of all corporate expenses authorized by David over the last 3 years." I continued explaining while taking detailed notes. The investigation that Michael and Robert conducted that very morning revealed figures that exceeded my worst expectations. Over the last 3 years, David had squandered more than $200,000 in unjustifiable expenses: weekly meals of $500 at luxury restaurants, trips to tourist destinations billed as business conferences, quarterly bonuses he had granted himself without authorization, and personal purchases charged to corporate accounts. "Catherine, technically we could proceed legally against David for embezzlement of corporate funds," Michael informed me after thoroughly reviewing the accounting records. "The evidence is overwhelming, and the amounts exceed the thresholds that constitute a financial crime. However, I was not looking to destroy David through the judicial system. My goal was to teach him the real consequences through the immediate loss of all the privileges he had never deserved. Michael, I need you to draft a power of attorney revoking all the banking authorizations David has on behalf of the companies," I instructed him while mentally reviewing every detail of the operation. "That letter must reach the banks before 9 in the morning, before he tries to make any financial moves." Michael worked through the night, preparing the necessary legal documentation. By 6 in the morning on September 24th, he had completed all the paperwork: contract termination, cancellation of benefits, revocation of banking powers, and notification to all relevant financial institutions. But the most devastating blow was yet to come. During our late-night conversation, I confessed to Michael a secret I had guarded closely for more than a decade: the existence of an international investment fund that I had gradually created since 2012, using the company's surplus profits. "Michael, that fund currently totals $2.4 million, I revealed, feeling the words release a huge emotional burden. David never knew of its existence because he always believed that the only family assets were the operating companies and our domestic savings. He lived believing his future depended exclusively on his job, not knowing that Michael and I had accumulated a completely independent parallel fortune. The creation of this fund had been a strategic decision I made when I first noticed signs of financial irresponsibility in David. Every quarter, I discreetly transferred between $50, $0, and $100,000 of the business profits into diversified investments in European, Asian, and North American markets. With Michael's death, I become the sole beneficiary of that fund, I explained to Michael as we reviewed the legal implications. David has forever lost any possibility of accessing those resources, and most importantly, he doesn't even know they exist. Michael immediately understood the dimensions of my strategy. "Catherine, you have executed a perfect maneuver," he congratulated me with genuine admiration. "David will simultaneously lose his source of income, his corporate benefits, his access to financial resources, and he will discover that his economic future was an illusion built on privileges that could be revoked at any moment. The conversation ended at 12:50 a.m., after establishing a plan of action that would be executed automatically over the next 24 hours. At dawn on September 24th, David woke up still the privileged CEO of 3 prosperous companies. Before noon, he would become an unemployed man with no resources, no benefits, and no secure future. A mother's revenge had begun. At 8 a.m. On September 24th, while I was having black coffee in the kitchen that Michael had filled with life for decades, my cell phone began to ring insistently. It was Andrew Miller, the general manager of Morales Construction, who had been with me for 15 years and knew the inner workings of our operations better than anyone. "Mrs. Morales, excuse me for bothering you so early, but I need to confirm some instructions I received this morning," he said with obvious confusion. "The lawyer, Michael Ortega, sent me official documents indicating immediate changes in the management structure. Do you confirm that David is no longer part of the executive team of any of the 3 companies?" "Andrew, those instructions are completely correct and must be executed immediately," I replied with the firmness that had characterized my business decisions for nearly 4 decades. David Morales Campos has been removed from all his positions for serious violation of the contractual clauses of professional conduct. As of this moment, he lacks any authority, access, or representation on behalf of our companies. What Andrew didn't know was that I had spent the night exhaustively investigating the real plans David had developed over the last few months. Using my administrative access to the corporate systems, I had discovered a series of electronic communications that revealed the true extent of my son's betrayal. On his work computer, David had maintained secret correspondence with Indiana Realty, one of our most aggressive competitors in the Chicago market. The emails, dated between April and August 2023, documented advanced negotiations for the complete sale of our 3 companies for a combined price of $8.2 million. David's strategy was diabolically simple. He expected to inherit majority control of the companies after my death and Michael's, and then immediately proceed with the total liquidation of the business empire I had built over 38 years of tireless work. But the most outrageous discovery was that David had promised Linda a completely new lifestyle based on that $8 million. In private messages between them, they planned to buy a $2 million mansion in Winnetka, acquire luxury vehicles, invest in a vacation apartment in Miami, and maintain a personal investment fund that would guarantee them monthly returns of over $20,000 without ever working. "The old woman will die soon, and then we can live how we really deserve," David had written to his wife in a July message that made me nauseous to read. "I already spoke with the buyers, and they are willing to close the deal as soon as we have complete legal control," Linda had replied with overflowing enthusiasm. "It's about time, honey. We've been waiting for years for your parents to understand they have an obligation to leave us an inheritance worthy of our social level. $8 million will finally allow us to live like the successful people we are." But David had made a fatal error in his calculations. All his economic projections were based on the assumption that he knew the family's assets completely, when in reality, he was ignorant of the existence of the international investment fund that Michael and I had meticulously accumulated for over a decade. That fund, discreetly managed by the Swiss firm Helvetic Asset Management, currently held $2.4 million distributed in European government bonds, shares of American technology companies, and stakes in Asian real estate funds. At 10 a.m., Robert Miller called me to confirm that he had executed all the financial instructions. "Mrs. Morales, I have canceled all corporate cards associated with David. I have removed his authorizations on the 6 corporate bank accounts and have notified the banks that any transaction he attempts to make must be rejected immediately." "Robert, what balance did David have available in his personal accounts the last time you checked his transactions?" I asked, as I began to understand the full dimensions of the financial crisis my son would face. The answer surprised me. "Mrs. Morales, David had less than $3,000 in his personal accounts. His entire lifestyle was completely dependent on corporate resources. That revelation confirmed that David had lived for years in a completely artificial financial bubble. His apparent economic prosperity was actually an illusion sustained by corporate privileges that I had naively authorized." "Robert, immediately prepare the documentation to cancel the lease on the Lincoln Park apartment that the company was paying for." "David," I instructed, visualizing each component of the transformation my son would experience, Also, cancel his private health insurance, his gym membership, and any other benefits he was receiving. At 11:30 in the morning, Andrew Miller called me again, this time with evident nervousness. "Mrs. Morales, David just arrived at the offices and is demanding an explanation as to why his access card isn't working at the main entrance." "Andrew, proceed exactly according to the instructions I gave you this morning," I replied with absolute calm. David should be treated with professional respect, but with unwavering firmness. He is no longer an employee of any of our companies and must leave the premises immediately after collecting his personal belongings. What followed was a phone call I had been waiting for hours. At 12:15 in the afternoon, David contacted me with a desperation I had never heard in his voice. "Mom, what's going on? They've thrown me out of my office, my cards don't work, and Andrew tells me I've been fired. This has to be a terrible misunderstanding." "David, there is no misunderstanding," I replied with the same coldness he had shown when he ordered my expulsion from Michael's wake. "Your behavior yesterday at the funeral home constitutes a serious violation of the professional conduct clauses of your contract. You have been permanently removed from all your positions for just cause, which means you have no right to severance or any additional benefits." The silence that followed lasted several endless seconds. When David finally spoke, his voice had changed completely. "Mom, can we talk about this? It was a moment of high emotional tension, but we can work it out as a family." "David, family ended yesterday when you decided to treat me like a stranger at your own father's funeral," I replied before hanging up for good. The war had officially begun, and David had just discovered that he had completely underestimated his opponent. During the days following David's dismissal, I decided to implement the most strategic phase of my plan, to turn his public humiliation at my wake into a tool to completely destroy his professional reputation throughout the Chicago construction industry. What my son didn't understand was that during a 40-year business career, I had cultivated a network of contacts that ranged from small contractors to the executives of the most influential corporations in Illinois. On Monday, September 27th, 3 days after the funeral, I began a series of carefully planned phone calls. My first conversation was with Edward Williams, president of the Chicago Construction Business Association, an organization that includes over 80% of the companies in the sector in the Chicago metropolitan area. "Edward, I need to share a very delicate situation with you that directly affects the reputation of our sector," I explained, after the formal greetings and his condolences on Michael's death. During my husband's funeral, my own son hired private security to prevent me from participating in the ceremony, creating a public scandal that was witnessed by dozens of professionals from our field. Edward knew perfectly well the importance of maintaining an image of respectability in an industry where personal trust and strong family ties were fundamental to securing important contracts. "Catherine, that is completely unacceptable," he replied with genuine indignation. "A man who is capable of humiliating his own mother at the most painful moment of her life completely lacks the ethical values necessary to represent our professional sector. Edward, David has been looking for job opportunities at other construction companies after I decided to permanently remove him from our companies," I continued, explaining while taking detailed notes of his reaction. "I consider it my moral responsibility to inform our colleagues about the type of person they would be dealing with if they decided to hire him." The conversation lasted more than 40 minutes, during which Edward assured me that he would discreetly communicate the situation to all members of the association. "Catherine, you can rest assured that no serious company in the sector will consider employing David after learning these details." He guaranteed me with the authority of someone who had been presiding over the most important trade organization in Chicago for 12 years. My second strategic call was to Linda Davis, CEO of Mediterranean Real Estate Development, the company that had shown the most interest in acquiring our companies according to the secret communications I had intercepted on David's computer. This conversation required a completely different approach because I needed to neutralize the sale plans without revealing that I knew about the clandestine negotiations. "Linda, I have been reflecting on the future of my companies after Michael's death." I commented with apparent casualness during a conversation that I believed she thought was a routine professional condolence call. Initially, I had considered the possibility of selling the companies to retire permanently, but recent events have made me completely reconsider that option. The surprise in her voice was evident, although she tried to disguise it professionally. "Catherine, I understand perfectly that this is a very difficult time to make important business decisions," she replied while I smiled, satisfied that I had confirmed her previous expectations of a possible transaction. Linda, I have decided that the best way to honor Michael's memory is to continue developing the companies we built together for so many years. I explained with the determination of someone who had found a renewed purpose. I am going to completely modernize our operations, expand into new markets, and ensure that our legacy endures for decades to come. That conversation definitively eliminated any possibility that David could execute his sale plans, even if he had managed to inherit control over the companies. The potential buyers already knew that I had no intention of retiring or transferring ownership of the companies in the foreseeable future, but my most devastating blow was reserved for Linda. Through contacts in the banking sector, I had discovered that she had applied for a personal loan of $150,000 the previous month, using David's inheritance expectations as collateral and presenting documentation that artificially inflated the estimated value of our family inheritance. On Wednesday, September 29th, I contacted Brenda Nelson directly, the branch manager of the Bank of America, where Linda had processed that credit application. Brenda, I need to inform you about a situation that may involve documentary fraud in a recent operation, I communicated, after identifying myself as the real owner of the assets Linda had used as financial backing. Mrs. Morales, I will immediately review the file you mention, she replied with the seriousness that characterizes bank executives when they detect possible irregularities. Over the next 20 minutes, I explained in detail how Linda had submitted falsified valuations of our business assets and had omitted crucial information about David's real legal situation within the companies. Mrs. Morales, we will proceed immediately to freeze that line of credit and initiate an internal investigation into the veracity of the documentation presented. Brenda confirmed after digitally reviewing all the documents in the file. If we confirm irregularities in the information provided, Mrs. Johnson will face serious legal consequences and will be permanently marked in our credit risk systems. That same afternoon, Linda received a call from the bank informing her that her loan had been canceled immediately and that she had to report to the head office to clarify the discrepancies detected in her application. The panic she experienced was such that she desperately contacted David, who no longer had the resources or influence to help her solve the problem. On Thursday, September 30th, exactly 1 week after the funeral, I received a call from Frank Johnson, Linda's father, who worked as a supervisor in a textile factory on the outskirts of Chicago. Mrs. Morales, I apologize for bothering you at such a painful time, but I need to talk to you about my daughter and David's situation, he said with evident discomfort. Frank was a hardworking and honest man who had never fully approved of the ostentatious lifestyle his daughter had adopted after marrying David. Mrs. Morales, Linda has told me that David lost his job and that they are having serious financial difficulties, he explained with the humility of someone who understands social hierarchies. My wife and I want to offer them to move in temporarily with us in Pilsen until they can stabilize their situation. The irony of the situation was perfect. Linda, who had for years despised the modest social level of my parents and mine, was now forced to move in with her own parents in a working-class neighborhood, in a 650-square-foot apartment they would share with 4 people. The contrast with the 1,300-square-foot apartment in Lincoln Park that the company had paid for them was humiliating and definitive. Frank, I am sincerely sorry that your family is going through this difficult situation, I replied with genuine courtesy to a man who was not at fault for his daughter's mistakes. I hope that David soon finds a job that allows him to properly support his wife and rebuild his professional life. But we both knew that possibility was practically non-existent. During that same week, David had visited 11 major construction companies in Chicago, and in all of them, he had received evasive answers or direct rejections. The network of contacts I had activated was working with the efficiency of a perfectly synchronized machine. On Friday, October 1st, 8 days after the funeral, David made his last desperate attempt at reconciliation. He showed up unannounced at the apartment where I had lived with Michael for 23 years, ringing the bell insistently until I decided to answer the door. His appearance had changed dramatically. He was wearing the same clothes from 3 days ago. He had visibly lost weight, and his eyes showed a desperation I had never seen in him. "Mom, please, we need to talk," he pleaded with a humility that contrasted sharply with the arrogance he had shown for years. "I know I made a terrible mistake at the funeral, but we are family. There has to be a way to fix this." David, the time for family conversations ended when you decided to turn your father's funeral into a public display of contempt for me, I replied, keeping the door ajar, not inviting him in. The consequences of your decisions are just beginning. Mom, I have no job. I have no money. Linda is desperate, and her parents have told us we can only stay at their house for 2 months, he explained with genuine tears running down his cheeks. I promise you that if you give me another chance, I will work harder than ever, and I will show you that I can change. For a few seconds, I felt a pang of maternal compassion for the desperate man in front of me. But then I remembered the coldness with which he had planned to sell the companies that Michael and I had built, the cruelty with which he had treated me during the months of his father's illness, and the deliberate humiliation he had orchestrated at his funeral. David, some decisions have irreversible consequences, I said before closing the door for good. It's time you learned to live without the privileges you never deserved. That night, as I ate dinner alone in the kitchen where Michael had prepared thousands of family meals, I knew I had crossed a point of no return. My son would have to rebuild his life completely from scratch, without my help, without my contacts, and without access to the wealth he had taken for granted his entire existence. The lesson was just beginning. During the first 2 weeks of October 2023, I established a discreet monitoring system to observe how David and Linda were adapting to their new reality. Through Lewis Carter, a private investigator I had used in the past to check the backgrounds of potential employees, I was able to document every aspect of the social and economic downfall they both experienced. Lewis' report from October 5th revealed details that surpassed my most optimistic expectations. David and Linda had indeed moved into her parents' apartment in Pilsen, a working-class neighborhood located more than an hour by public transport from downtown Chicago, where they had previously lived. The contrast was devastating. From 1,300 square feet of luxury in Lincoln Park to sharing 650 square feet with 4 adults in a public housing building constructed in the 82nd. Mrs. Morales, Mrs. Johnson has had several nervous breakdowns during the first week, Louis informed me with the professional precision that characterized his investigations. Neighbors have reported constant arguments between her and David, mainly about the impossibility of maintaining the standard of living they were accustomed to. Apparently, she completely blames David for the loss of their social and economic privileges. The most revealing information concerned David's desperate attempts to find employment in the construction sector. During those 2 weeks, he had visited 23 different companies, from large corporations to small family-owned businesses. In all of them, he had received identical responses. We currently have no available positions, or we will contact you if something suitable for your profile comes up. Louis had managed to discreetly record one of these job interviews, where David had tried to present himself to Ramirez Construction as an experienced executive with an extensive background in business management. The owner, Manuel Ramirez, had responded with brutal frankness. "Mr. Morales, your reputation in the sector is completely destroyed. Everyone knows what you did to your mother at your father's funeral. No serious company is going to hire someone capable of that kind of family cruelty." But my greatest satisfaction came when Louis informed me about Linda's reaction to the reality of living with a normal working-class family. Mrs. Morales, the lady has openly expressed her disgust at having to share a bathroom with her in-laws, eat homemade food prepared by David's mother-in-law, and use public transportation to get around. He detailed while I smiled, remembering her disparaging comments about our modest lifestyle. On October 15th, I received an unexpected call from Mary Johnson, Linda's mother, a 58-year-old woman who worked as a cashier at a local supermarket. Her voice reflected a mixture of shame and desperation that genuinely moved me because I recognized in her the dignity of honest working people. "Mrs. Morales, I know I have no right to bother you after everything that has happened, but I need to ask you a personal favor," she said with the humility of someone who understands she is asking for something she does not deserve. "My daughter Linda is destroying the peace of our home. She cries constantly, refuses to look for a job, and treats my husband and me as if we were servants. We can't maintain this situation for much longer." Mary explained that Linda had systematically rejected all the job offers they had found for her: a cashier at a clothing store, a receptionist at a dental clinic, a saleswoman at a perfume shop. Her response was always the same: "I am not suited for working-class jobs. David has to fix this and get me the life I deserve." Mrs. Morales, my daughter was always spoiled, But these years of luxurious living have turned her into an unrecognizable person, Mary continued, with a maternal sadness that painfully reminded me of my own reflections on David. She is convinced that you will eventually forgive David and that everything will go back to the way it was. She doesn't understand that actions have definitive consequences. Mary, I am deeply sorry that your family is going through this situation, I responded with genuine sincerity, but I can offer no hope of reconciliation. David made decisions that have irreparably broken our family ties. Linda will have to adapt to a reality where there is no possibility of recovering the privileges she lost. That conversation confirmed that my strategy had worked perfectly. Linda, the true intellectual instigator behind David's unbridled ambition, was experiencing a complete psychological collapse upon facing the impossibility of maintaining her artificial social status. On October 20th, Louis provided me with the most satisfying report of all. David had finally found a job as a construction materials salesman at Martinez Supplies, a medium-sized company specializing in supplies for small projects and home renovations. His monthly salary would be $1,200, exactly 10 times less than the $12,000 he had been earning as CEO of our companies. Mrs. Morales, David's first day at work was traumatic, Louis recounted with evident professional amusement. He arrived wearing one of his $2,000 suits, but the supervisor explained that he had to wear normal work clothes because he would spend most of his time in the warehouse, loading materials and attending to masons and small contractors. The irony was perfect. David, who for years had avoided any real physical labor, was now forced to carry bags of cement, move wooden planks, and deal differently with the same professionals he once considered socially inferior. His immediate boss was Thomas Rogers, a 4-5-year-old man who had started as a bricklayer's assistant and had risen through merit to become a sales supervisor. Mr. Rogers showed no special consideration for David because of his last name or his university education, Louis continued, documenting every humiliating detail. He assigned him the most basic tasks: inventory of materials, cleaning the warehouse, and answering phone calls from customers requesting quotes for minor works. David must earn the respect of his colleagues day by day, just like any new employee with no practical experience. But the most devastating blow to David's pride came when Louis informed me about his first work encounter with former professional contacts, Mrs. Morales. Yesterday, David assisted a customer who turned out to be David Serrano, the manager of Valle Norte Construction, he recounted with evident satisfaction. Mr. Serrano immediately recognized David and asked with surprise what he was doing working in a materials warehouse. David's response had been pathetic. He tried to explain that he was exploring different aspects of the construction business from operational perspectives, and that his job at Martinez Supplies was a temporary experience for professional enrichment. David Serrano had smiled condescendingly and had ordered him to deliver 5 bags of plaster for a minor project, treating him exactly as what he now was, a subordinate employee of a supply company. On October 25th, exactly 1 month after Michael's funeral, I received a desperate call from Linda. It was the first time she had tried to contact me directly since the day of the humiliation at the funeral home, and her voice showed an emotional break that indicated she had reached the limit of her psychological resistance. Mrs. Morales, please, I need to beg you to reconsider your position regarding David. She began with a feigned humility that failed to hide her underlying desperation. I understand that David made a terrible mistake, but the punishment he is receiving is disproportionate. We are living in unworthy conditions for people of our educational and social level. Linda, educational level does not automatically grant economic privileges, and social level is built through dignified actions, not through the exploitation of family ties, I replied with the serenity of someone who has found peace in her decisions. Mrs. Morales, David is working 12 hours a day loading construction materials for $1,200 a month. She continued to complain, as if this situation were a cosmic injustice. I can't live like this. My parents have given me an ultimatum. Either I get a job immediately, or I have to find another place to live. It's not fair that I pay the consequences for David's mistakes. Linda, for years you enjoyed economic privileges that you never earned through your own work, I explained with crystal clarity. Now you have the opportunity to develop economic and personal independence through your own effort. Many people would consider that situation an opportunity for growth, not a tragedy. The conversation ended when Linda began to cry uncontrollably and hung up the phone. That night, Louis confirmed that she had had a nervous breakdown and that her parents had called for medical assistance to treat her at their home. Linda's collapse marked the end of the second phase of my plan. David had lost his job, his social status, his economic stability, and now he was also losing the woman who had been his main accomplice in all the plans of family exploitation. Justice was working exactly as I had planned. On the 30th of October 2023, as David completed his first full week as a salesman at Martinez Supplies, I discreetly initiated the final phase of my strategy, the definitive liquidation of the business empire I had built over 4 decades. This decision did not arise from resentment, but from a deep understanding that the time had come to completely transform the legacy I would leave in the world. During the lonely nights in the apartment I had shared with Michael, I had reflected exhaustively on the true meaning of our lives. The companies we built together had been our pride, but they had also created the monster of privilege that turned David into the cruel and ambitious person he proved to be at his father's funeral. My first call was to Daniel Vance, CEO of Castilla Real Estate Group, a corporation that had been expressing interest in acquiring consolidated companies in the Chicago construction sector for 3 years. Unlike the secret negotiations David had held with opportunistic buyers, my proposal was based on completely different principles. Daniel, I am seriously considering the possibility of transferring my 3 companies, but under very specific conditions that guarantee the job security of all our employees, I explained during a meeting in his office at the Willis Tower. I am not looking to maximize the sale price, but to find buyers committed to maintaining our corporate culture and our quality standards. Daniel had known my reputation for decades and immediately understood that this opportunity was exceptional. Catherine, Castilla Group is fully committed to preserving the human teams of the companies we acquire. He assured me with the seriousness of an executive who genuinely valued job stability. Our main interest is to incorporate experienced professionals and consolidated projects, not to restructure successful organizations. The negotiations progressed with a fluidity that contrasted dramatically with the clandestine maneuvers David had tried to carry out. Instead of the $2 million my son had secretly negotiated with speculative buyers, Daniel offered me $9.5 million with explicit contractual guarantees to maintain employees, branches, and ongoing projects for a minimum of 5 years. But my most transformative decision concerned the fate of those resources. During conversations with Michael Ortega about the legal structuring of the operation, I revealed a plan I had been developing since Michael's death. The creation of the Michael Campos Charitable Foundation, an organization dedicated exclusively to providing decent housing for low-income working families. Michael, I want the $9.5 million from the sale, plus the $2.4 million from the Swiss Investment Fund, to become the foundational capital of this organization, I explained as we reviewed the preliminary statutes he had prepared, following my instructions. The foundation will build quality housing complexes for families who cannot access homeownership through the traditional real estate market. The irony of this decision was perfect. The money David had planned to use to buy a mansion in Winnetka and maintain a parasitic lifestyle would become decent homes for dozens of humble families who would genuinely value the opportunity to own their own home. On November 5th, while we were formalizing the sale contracts with Castilla Group, Louis Carter provided me with a devastating update on David and Linda's situation. Mrs. Morales, Mrs. Johnson definitively left her parents' home 3 days ago. He informed me with the precision that characterized his reports. Apparently, she had gotten a job as a sales assistant in a cosmetics store at the Plaza Norte shopping center, but she quit after 2 days, claiming the job was humiliating for someone with her background. Linda's departure had been particularly dramatic. According to Louis, she had completely emptied the savings account she shared with David, taking the last $1,800 of their personal resources. She had also taken the few valuable jewels they still had and had disappeared without leaving any information about her whereabouts. David came home from work on Wednesday night and found a note where Linda told him she was not willing to live like a poor person for the rest of her life. Louis continued, recounting the details of the abandonment. Apparently, she wrote that she had made the mistake of marrying someone who turned out to be a failure and that she deserved a better life than what he could offer her. David's reaction to his wife's abandonment had been a complete emotional breakdown. According to the testimony of Mary Johnson, Linda's mother, David had spent 3 consecutive nights crying on the living room sofa, obsessively repeating that all of this was my fault and that I had destroyed his life out of stupid pride. Mrs. Morales, David has tried to contact Linda through all their mutual acquaintances, but she has completely blocked any communication, Louis detailed as I reflected on the psychological dimensions of the punishment my son was experiencing. Linda's parents have told him he can stay at their house until the end of the year, but after that, he will have to find independent accommodation. On November 15th, exactly 2 months after Michael's funeral, I definitively signed the transfer contracts for the 3 companies to Castilla Group. The ceremony was held in Michael Ortega's office with the presence of Daniel Vance and the legal representatives of both parties. When I put my signature on the last document, I knew I had forever closed a chapter of my life that had lasted 4 decades. "Catherine, it has been an honor to work with you all these years," Daniel said, as we shook hands to definitively seal the deal. "I hope the Michael Campos Foundation becomes a model of corporate social responsibility in Chicago." That same afternoon, I called a meeting with all the employees of the 3 companies to personally communicate the changes. Andrew Miller, Robert Miller, and the other managers who had worked loyally with me for years were initially concerned about their job futures, but they were completely reassured when I explained the contractual guarantees I had negotiated. "Colleagues, this transition guarantees the stability of all your jobs and the continuity of our projects," I explained in the Morales construction meeting room where we had celebrated so many successful meetings. Castilla Group has demonstrated for decades its commitment to maintaining the human teams of the companies they acquire. You will continue to do the excellent work you have always done. The inevitable question came from Carlos Mendoza, our chief engineer. "Mrs. Morales, what will happen with David? Will he be part of the management team under the new administration?" The uncomfortable silence that followed allowed me to respond with a clarity that eliminated any future speculation. "David is no longer part of our business group, nor will he be part of future operations under any circumstances," I declared, with the firmness of a definitive decision. His separation from our companies was permanent and irreversible. That night, while dining alone at the restaurant where Michael and I had celebrated our wedding anniversaries for over 2 decades, I reflected on the magnitude of the transformation I had managed to execute in less than 2 months. David had lost his executive job, his social status, his economic stability, his wife, and now also any future possibility of reconnecting with the business empire he had taken for granted. But most importantly, he had forever lost access to the family's real wealth. The nearly $12 million that would now form the capital of the Michael Campos Foundation would become decent homes for working families, not luxuries for social parasites. On November 20th, I received the call I had been waiting for weeks. David, with a voice broken by desperation, contacted me from a payphone because he could no longer afford his cell phone bills. "Mom, Linda left me. I'm going to lose the place where I live, and I don't have enough money to even rent a room." He pleaded with the humility of someone who finally understands the gravity of his situation. "I've lost everything because of a moment of stupid pride. Please, give me one last chance to show that I've learned my lesson." "David, the most important lessons in life are learned by living the full consequences of our decisions," I replied with the serenity of someone who has found peace in justice. "Your learning is just beginning." When I hung up the phone, I knew that my son would have to rebuild his entire existence from the ground up, without privileges, without external help, and without the family safety net he had taken for granted for 38 years. The real education of David Morales Campos had finally begun. On the 25th of November, 2023, 2 months after Michael's funeral, I went to the Chicago City Hall to formalize the official constitution of the Michael Campos Charitable Foundation. The ceremony was presided over by the Commissioner of Social Affairs, Linda Beltran, who was impressed by the magnitude of the foundational capital I was contributing. "Mrs. Morales, it is extraordinary to find entrepreneurs willing to allocate their entire fortune to projects of social benefit," she commented, while reviewing the constitutional documents that Michael Ortega had meticulously prepared. "The foundation you are creating will have a direct impact on the lives of hundreds of Chicago families for decades to come." The initial capital of $11.9 million automatically made the Michael Campos Foundation one of the most powerful charitable organizations in the state of Illinois. My main satisfaction did not come from the institutional recognition, but from the certainty that Michael would have completely approved of this decision to transform our business legacy into concrete hope for hardworking people in need. The first meeting of the board of directors was held on November 30th in an office I rented specifically for administrative operations. I integrated 3 people into the board whose moral integrity would guarantee that the resources were used efficiently. Father Anthony Serrano, a parish priest who had been working with needy families for 20 years, the architect Helen Rogers, a specialist in social housing, and the economist Frank Nelson, an expert in the management of charitable organizations. Catherine, the first project I propose is the construction of 50 affordable housing units on land in South Pilsen, Helen suggested after reviewing the housing needs studies. The estimated cost would be $3.5 million, offering 650 square foot apartments to families with incomes below $2,000 per month. The geographical irony was perfect. We would build decent housing in the same district where David now lived precariously, at his ex-in-law's house, demonstrating that the money he had planned to squander on personal luxuries would be transformed into real homes for working-class families from the same neighborhood where he was experiencing the humility of economic dependence. While we were developing these plans, Louis Carter provided me with devastating reports on David's decline. His report from December 2nd revealed that my son had been forced to move out of his ex-in-law's apartment due to unbearable family tensions. Mrs. Morales, David managed to rent a room in a shared apartment in back of the yards for $350 a month, Louis informed me. He shares the apartment with 4 other people, a Romanian immigrant who works in construction, 2 university students, and a divorced woman who works cleaning offices at night. The contrast with his previous life was devastating. David slept in an 80 square foot room, shared a kitchen and bathroom with strangers, washed his clothes by hand, and bought exclusively basic foods at discount supermarkets. Mrs. Morales, David has lost more than 25 pounds since September, Louis continued, documenting the physical transformation. His appearance has changed dramatically. He wears the same clothes for days in a row, walks like a defeated person, and avoids eye contact with people who might recognize him. The most revealing information was about his job performance at Martinez Supplies. Thomas Rogers, his supervisor, had expressed doubts about David's ability to adapt to physical work. "The boy tries, but it's clear he's never really worked," Thomas had commented. "He gets tired quickly, loading materials, gets confused with prices, and some customers complain that he seems lost with basic technical questions." On December 15th, while supervising the selection of land for our first housing project, I received an unexpected call from Frank Johnson, Linda's father. His voice showed genuine shame and concern. "Mrs. Morales, David came to our house last night to bring us a letter that Linda had sent him from Barcelona," he said honestly. The letter revealed that Linda had found a job as an event hostess and had started a relationship with the manager of that company, a divorced man with considerable financial resources. "My daughter wrote to David that she had finally found someone who could offer her the life she deserved and that she would never return to Chicago," Frank explained sadly. David stayed crying in our kitchen for 2 hours, repeating that he had lost everything because of a moment of stupid pride. "Frank, I'm sorry that Linda made that decision, but David will have to learn to rebuild his life independently," I replied with understanding for a father who was not to blame for his daughter's mistakes. On December 20th, Louis provided me with the most devastating report. David had been fired from Martinez Supplies due to unsatisfactory performance and problematic incidents with customers. "Mrs. Morales, the final incident occurred when David tried to sell expensive materials to a customer who needed affordable options," Louis detailed. The customer, a self-employed mason, complained because David had insisted on premium products when he had specifically asked for basic materials for a small renovation. Thomas Rogers had explained clearly, "David doesn't understand our customers because he has never lived with real economic limitations." That shows a complete disconnection from the reality of working people. The dismissal occurred on December 18th, leaving David without income days before Christmas. His financial situation was desperate: $350 for monthly rent, basic expenses, and no job prospects in a sector where his reputation was destroyed. On December 21st, David made his last desperate attempt. He showed up unannounced at my apartment, ringing the doorbell insistently for more than 20 minutes. I found an unrecognizable man, thin, poorly dressed, with a beard of several days and an expression of absolute desperation. "Mom, they're going to kick me out of my room because I can't pay the rent for January," he pleaded with genuine tears. "I have no job. I have no money. I have no one in the world." "David, being my son was a privilege you lost when you decided to humiliate me at your father's funeral," I replied, keeping the door ajar. "The consequences include learning to survive without the family protection you took for granted." "Mom, please, I just need a little help to start over," he insisted desperately. "I promise I will work at anything, that I will never make mistakes like that again." "David, some lessons are only learned by fully experiencing their consequences," I explained before closing the door for good. That night, I knew that my son would spend his first Christmas in real poverty, without family, without resources, and without hope of external rescue. Justice had reached its fullest expression. On the 8th of January 2024, 4 months after Michael's funeral, I personally went to the site in South Pilsen, where we would begin construction of the first housing complex of the Michael Campos Foundation. Accompanied by Helen Rogers and Father Anthony, we toured the 65,000 square feet that would be transformed into 50 dignified homes for working families. "Catherine, the project is designed to maximize both the functionality and dignity of the homes," Helen explained, pointing to different sections of the land. "Each apartment will have 650 square feet distributed in 2 bedrooms, a living room kitchen, a full bathroom, and a small terrace. We will also include a playground, a basic sports area, and a community room." The irony of the location was not lost on me. We were building quality housing in the same neighborhood where David was struggling to survive with minimal resources. According to Louis Carter, my son had lost his rented room in back of the yards because he couldn't pay the January rent and was now sleeping in a municipal shelter for the homeless. "Father Anthony, I would like you to personally supervise the selection process for the beneficiary families," I requested. "Your 2 decades of experience working with needy families will ensure that the homes truly go to those who need them most." Father Anthony had prepared a preliminary list of 45 families who met all the criteria: income below $1,800 a month, stable employment for at least 2 years, and no homeownership. Among the pre-selected were touching cases: Mary Carmen Vega, a widowed nursing assistant with 2 children who paid $700 for a dilapidated 430-square-foot apartment; David Luis Hernandez, a mechanic who lived with his pregnant wife at his parents' house; Patricia Moreno, a divorced teacher who shared an apartment with 3 other women. "These people work honestly every day, but the Chicago real estate market has made it impossible for them to access decent housing," Father Anthony continued. As I reflected on the contrast between these hard-working families and the parasitic life David had led for years. On January 15th, while supervising municipal procedures for construction permits, I received a call from Amy Johnson, Linda's younger sister, who worked as an administrative assistant in a management office in Mostoles. Her voice showed evident turmoil. "Mrs. Morales, David came to look for me at work because he knew I leave late and no one else would be there," she said cautiously. Amy recounted a disturbing encounter. David had waited for 2 hours with the neglected appearance of someone who had lost control of his personal situation. "David begged me to intercede with you," she continued uncomfortably. "He told me he had been sleeping in municipal shelters for 3 weeks and couldn't find a job because his reputation is completely destroyed." But the most revealing part had been the full confession about the secret plans developed with Linda. "David told me everything: how they had planned to sell the family businesses after inheriting them, how Linda had constantly pressured him for more money, and how they had calculated they could live luxuriously without working thanks to the wealth you had built. Amy, I appreciate you informing me, but David's situation is not going to change," I replied with definitive firmness. "Late confessions do not erase the consequences of years of planned betrayal." "David also told me something that shocked me deeply," Amy continued with a trembling voice. "He confessed that during the months of Mr. Michael's illness, he and my sister even said to each other that they hoped he would die soon so they could start their new life. When he told me, he was crying and kept repeating that he had never imagined how terrible it sounded until he actually lost him. That revelation confirmed the magnitude of the moral degradation David had reached. To have actively wished for Michael's death to accelerate economic plans transcended any possibility of maternal understanding. On January 20th, Louis provided me with a devastating update. David has been expelled from the municipal shelter for a fight with another resident. Apparently, the few personal belongings he had were stolen, and he reacted violently. The transformation from a privileged executive to an aggressive homeless person had been completed in 4 months. David is literally sleeping on the street, in Millennium Park on warm nights, and in subway stations when it's extremely cold, Louis continued. His physical appearance is unrecognizable. He has lost more than 40 pounds, wears the same clothes for weeks, and shows clear signs of malnutrition. More disturbing was that David had developed erratic behaviors, indicating a possible psychological collapse. Several witnesses have seen him talking to himself in public parks, arguing loudly with imaginary people, and showing signs of mental confusion, Louis detailed with concern. The transition from a completely protected life to absolute homelessness in such a short time can cause severe psychological disorders. On January 25th, while reviewing contracts with the construction company that would execute our project, I reflected on the abysmal moral distance between the fate of the family fortune and the situation of the one who had expected to inherit it. The resources David had planned to squander on luxuries were becoming real foundations for 50 working-class families. The construction of the Michael Campos I housing complex officially began on January 30th with a symbolic ceremony where Father Anthony blessed the grounds and Helen explained the project details to the beneficiary families. Among the attendees, I recognized faces that reflected genuine hope: working parents who would finally have their own home, single women who would achieve housing independence after years of precariousness. "Catherine, this foundation will truly transform the lives of these families," Father Anthony commented, watching as the workers began the foundation work. The contrast with David's original intentions shows how the same money can build hope or fuel selfishness, depending on the values of the person who manages it. That afternoon, returning to my apartment, I passed near Millennium Park and saw a ragged figure sleeping on a public bench. For a few seconds I thought it might be David, but I decided not to get closer to verify. Some lessons require being fully experienced without external interruptions. My son had chosen his path the day he decided to humiliate me at Michael's funeral. The consequences would continue to teach him about dignity, work, and family respect until he truly understood their meaning. But that understanding, if it ever came, no longer concerned me. My energy was fully dedicated to building the legacy that Michael would have approved of: decent homes for people who genuinely valued the opportunity to have a family and a stable future. On the 15th of March 2024, 6 months after Michael's funeral, I received a call from Dr. Manuel Ruiz Castillo, director of San Carlos Clinical Hospital, about a medical situation that required my attention as the closest relative. "Mrs. Morales, your son David was admitted to the emergency room yesterday in critical condition," he informed me with professional seriousness. "He presents with severe malnutrition, hypothermia, and clear signs of psychological deterioration associated with prolonged deprivation. We need to discuss the medical decisions we must make." During the drive to the hospital, I reflected on the irony. While I was building decent homes for working families, my own son had reached the point of requiring emergency medical attention for absolute destitution. Dr. Ruiz greeted me with medical files that meticulously documented David's physical condition. "Your son has lost 70 pounds since last September," he explained, reviewing X-rays and clinical analyses. "His current weight is 128 pounds, which constitutes severe malnutrition. He also presents symptoms of major depression, episodes of temporal disorientation, and self-destructive behaviors." The medical photographs showed a shocking transformation. David had aged decades in a few months, with completely gray hair, sallow skin, skeletal limbs, and an empty expression that suggested a complete psychological collapse. "Doctor, what is the medical prognosis?" I asked, trying to emotionally process the images of my son turned into a malnourished homeless person. "With appropriate treatment and supervised nutritional rehabilitation, David can recover physically in 3 to 6 months," he replied cautiously. However, his psychological state requires specialized psychiatric intervention. He has developed acute social maladjustment syndrome, an inability to function in society after experiencing a traumatic loss of status and resources. The medical reality confirmed that my strategy had worked beyond my expectations. David had not only lost economic and social privileges, but he had experienced such a complete psychological destruction that it required professional reconstruction of his basic personality. "Doctor, as the responsible family member, I authorize all necessary medical treatments to stabilize his physical condition, I communicated after carefully considering my options. However, once medically stable, David must continue his rehabilitation independently. I will not assist financially or emotionally in his personal recovery. The doctor showed surprise at my seemingly inflexible position. Are you sure you do not wish to be involved in the rehabilitation process? Your family support could be crucial for a successful recovery. Doctor, David arrived at this situation through conscious decisions that demonstrated absolute contempt for family ties, I explained calmly. His rehabilitation must be the result of his own effort, not of external resources he has not earned through dignified behavior. On March 20th, while David remained hospitalized receiving intravenous feeding and basic psychiatric treatment, I presided over the groundbreaking ceremony for the Michael Campos I Housing Complex. The 50 beneficiary families attended with their children, creating an atmosphere of authentic celebration that contrasted dramatically with the personal tragedy unfolding simultaneously at the hospital. Catherine, this project represents concrete hope for people who work honestly but cannot access decent housing due to economic limitations, Helen Ruiz commented, watching the children play around the construction machinery. Among the families present, I recognized moving stories of overcoming adversity. Carmen Vega had brought wildflowers to honor Michael's memory. David Luis Hernandez had come straight from his job with his uniform stained with grease, but with a smile that reflected genuine gratitude. Patricia Moreno held her daughter's hand while explaining that soon they would have a house just for us. Father Anthony, these families understand the real value of having a home because they have fought to get it through honest work, I commented as he symbolically blessed the foundations. Their authentic gratitude contrasts completely with the parasitic mentality of those who expect to inherit privileges without earning them. On March 25th, I received the expected call. Doctor. Ruiz informed me that David had been medically discharged after his basic physical condition was stabilized, but he had refused to continue the recommended psychiatric treatment and had left the hospital against medical advice. David specifically asked if you had authorized financial support for his social rehabilitation. The doctor informed me with concern. When I confirmed that I had refused to be involved in his personal recovery, he had a severe emotional crisis and decided to leave immediately. Louis Carter contacted me to inform me that David had been seen again on the streets of downtown Chicago, but now with an appearance and behavior that suggested irreversible psychological deterioration. David is constantly talking to himself, occasionally shouting his mother's name, and showing aggression towards people who try to help him. On April 1st, exactly 6 months and 1 week after Michael's funeral, I made the final decision that would definitively close any possibility of future reconciliation. I contacted Michael Ortega to modify my will, completely removing any reference to David as a potential heir. Michael, I want it legally established that David Morales Campos has no right to claim any inheritance from my personal estate. I instructed, signing notarial documents that would guarantee the perpetual continuity of the foundation. The will amendment included an explanatory clause. My son David demonstrated absolute contempt for family ties by publicly humiliating me at his father's funeral, secretly planning the liquidation of the family estate, and treating Michael with cruelty during his terminal illness. These actions transcend the possibility of forgiveness and justify his permanent exclusion from any patrimonial benefit. On April 10th, while supervising the installation of the first metal structures of the housing complex, I reflected on the complete transformation achieved in less than 7 months. The wealth that David had planned to squander was being converted into real homes for working families, while he experienced the absolute destitution that results from betraying the most sacred family ties. David had forever lost the opportunity to be part of the legacy that Michael and I had built together. His place in the family history had been taken by 50 working families who would genuinely value the opportunity to have a dignified home. On the 23rd of September 2024, exactly 1 year after Michael's funeral, I stood before the 50 finished homes of the Michael Campos I housing complex, watching as the beneficiary families officially received the keys to their new homes. The inauguration ceremony had brought together more than 200 people, the new residents, their families, municipal representatives, and local journalists documenting this pioneering private social housing project. Mrs. Morales, on behalf of all the families who today receive a new opportunity in life, we want to express our infinite gratitude, declared Mary Carmen Vega. the widowed nurse who had been chosen as the representative of the beneficiaries. "You have transformed our dreams into concrete reality, proving that there are people willing to share their fortune with those who truly need it." As I listened to the words of thanks and watched the children run happily through the community gardens surrounding their new homes, I experienced a sense of fulfillment that had eluded my existence for decades. This housing complex represented the true legacy that Michael would have wanted: working families building dignified futures in safe and welcoming homes. Father Anthony approached to share a reflection that perfectly summed up the meaning of what we had achieved. "Catherine, you have achieved something extraordinary, transforming personal pain into collective hope," he said as we watched David Luis Hernandez, the mechanic, lovingly carry his newborn baby across the threshold of his new home. Michael would be deeply proud to see how his memory has turned into real homes for these families. During the ceremony, several journalists asked me about the motivations that had inspired the creation of the foundation. "True wealth does not consist in accumulating assets, but in using them to generate genuine opportunities for social progress," I answered, deliberately avoiding mentioning the family circumstances that had precipitated my decision. My husband Michael always believed that those who have had economic success have a moral responsibility to share that fortune with people who work honestly but face structural limitations. That afternoon, walking alone through the newly paved streets of the housing complex, I reflected on the absolute contrast between this celebration of family hope and the situation of David, who, according to Lewis Carter's latest report, continued to live in conditions of extreme destitution in various municipal shelters and temporary refuges in Chicago. The most recent report documented that David had developed chronic vagrancy syndrome, a psychological inability to maintain a fixed residence, systematic rejection of job reintegration programs, and erratic behavior that made any attempt at social rehabilitation difficult. My son had literally become a professional homeless person, completely dependent on institutional charity to survive day by day. But the most revealing thing was that David had begun to develop a delusional narrative about his situation, systematically blaming external conspiracies for his social downfall, instead of recognizing the direct consequences of his own decisions. According to testimonies from social workers, he obsessively repeated that mysterious forces had destroyed his professional life and that one day he would recover everything that had been unjustly stolen from him. On October 5th, while reviewing the plans for the second housing project we would start in the spring of 2025, I received a call from Dr. Patricia Hernandez Serrano, a psychiatrist who had briefly treated David during his hospitalization in March. "Mrs. Morales, I am contacting you because David has been admitted to our service again, this time for an acute psychotic episode that requires intensive antipsychotic medication," she informed me with professional concern. His current mental state suggests an irreversible deterioration of his basic cognitive abilities. The doctor explained that David had been found in Millennium Park shouting incoherently about recovering his company and proving his innocence before imaginary courts. The officers who had assisted him reported completely disorganized behavior, tattered clothing, non-existent hygiene, and a fragmented speech that alternated between desperate pleas and confused threats directed at non-existent people. "Doctor, I again authorize all necessary medical treatments to stabilize his condition, but I maintain my position of not getting personally involved in his rehabilitation process," I replied with the serenity of a definitive and irreversible decision. David must face the full consequences of his decisions through institutional resources, not through family support that he lost through undignified behavior. On October 15th, Helen Ruiz presented me with the final designs for our second project, Michael Campos II, a complex of 60 single-family homes that we would build on land in Alcorcón for families with multiple children. The estimated budget of $4.2 million would be fully financed with the income from the foundation's remaining capital. "Catherine, this second project will specifically benefit large families who face systematic discrimination in the private rental market," Helen explained, reviewing plans that showed 860-square-foot homes with 3 bedrooms, individual gardens, and community spaces designed for children's activities. During those weeks, I experienced a professional satisfaction that had eluded my existence during the last years of my traditional business career. Building homes for grateful families provided a sense of purpose that completely transcended the accumulation of personal wealth that had characterized my previous decades. On November 5th, Carter provided me with what would be his final report on David. Mrs. Morales, I must inform you that David has completely disappeared from the Chicago social assistance system. He informed me with a mixture of professional concern and personal relief. He has not used shelter services for more than 3 weeks, and there are no records of his presence in hospitals, day centers, or reintegration programs. Carter, I consider the investigation into David officially closed. I communicated with tranquility. My attention is exclusively dedicated to the Foundation's projects and the well-being of the families who benefit from our housing programs. On the 23rd of September 2025, the second anniversary of Michael's funeral, I found myself once again before the homes of the Michael Campos I-complex, but this time accompanied by the 110 residents who had turned those buildings into a prosperous and harmonious neighborhood. That night, dining in the apartment where Michael and I had shared so many years of authentic happiness, I understood that I had achieved something extraordinary, transforming the most painful betrayal of my existence into the most significant legacy I could have built. The 110 homes represented real homes for families who genuinely deserved those opportunities. David had disappeared from my life as he had appeared, as a lesson on the importance of building family ties based on mutual respect, honest work, and authentic values. His definitive absence had freed me to dedicate my remaining years to purposes that Michael would have fully approved of. My life had finally acquired the meaning I had always sought.